Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Marc Faber to the program. A renowned economist, decades long veteran of the finance industry, and the publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. Today, we're going to dive into the out of control US government debt and deficits and the big, beautiful bill estimated by some to boost debt levels by $3 trillion. Where does this infinite debt loop end, and what are its implications for the global economy? We're going to talk about gold and uncover why Mark sees more upside ahead in silver and platinum. We're also going to break down the recent BRICS Summit in Rio, the EU continuing to become a warmongering, authoritarian state, and so much more. Before we dive in, we've got merch, commodity culture, hats, hoodies, t-shirts, and mugs, all backed by a 100% quality guarantee. Click the link in the description below. And now, my friends, strap yourselves in for my conversation with Marc Faber. Marc Faber, great to have you back on Commodity Culture. I want to kick things off by discussing the big, beautiful bill and what it could mean for the U.S. economy. Randall Forsyth wrote this in a recent Barron's article, quote, with the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill passed by the House of Representatives estimated to boost the nation's debt by an additional $3 trillion, the most intractable part of the budget is the interest expense on that burgeoning debt. Now, I thought the Trump administration was supposed to be slashing government spending, but here we are. This bill is in addition to a planned 13% increase in the military budget for 2026, bringing it to over $1 trillion. What are your thoughts on this big, beautiful bill? Is this all going to accelerate the collapse of this debt-based system that seems to be expanding without an end in sight?
Yes, I think there is a real possibility that this will accelerate the problems that are inherent in democracies and in voters that want to vote for measures that essentially require more and more spending and subsidies and so forth, a bigger government. People enjoy essentially the safety net of big government. What they don't enjoy is paying for it. And so each democracy in the Western world has basically a fiscal deficit. They can't collect enough tax to pay for all the nonsense that they promise to the to the people, to the voters. And Mr. Trump is a man who throughout his life has had a complete disregard for debts and especially for repaying the debts. So uh, I would not be surprised if under Mr. Trump, for the first time in modern history, the US would default on its debts.
What would the implications of that be? And do you think that the US, in a default type situation, I mean, some would argue that the money printing in 2020 and 2021 was sort of a default in a way. Some would also argue that when Nixon took gold from backing the dollar, that was also a default. So, in some sense, we can look at these as, I guess, soft defaults, but you would see them potentially straight up defaulting on certain debt. Would that be across the board? Would that be perhaps debt to foreign nations that perhaps foreign nations that are unfriendly to them, like China? Do you think they'd start with something like
Possible?
that?
They froze assets of unfriendly countries or countries the US perceives as unfriendly. We could debate, are these countries unfriendly or are they just countries that do not go along with the policies of the US and dance to the tune of the US? But my sense is a default. I mean, the Nixon devaluation in 71, yes, to some extent it was a default in the sense that the US previously had been able and willing to supply gold at $35 an ounce. In other words, you could essentially go to the US, turn in your dollars, and get $35 an ounce. but after that, no more. And the default in 2020, we have to define what is a default. Money printing is a different thing than a default, because with money printing, you do not default. That's why it's so popular. Default, you touched on an important subject. The default, how do we do it? Do we default across the board and hurt the pension fund industry in the US? And a lot of pension funds are government pension funds. And then we have to go to the pensioners and tell them, look, terribly sorry, we have less money and we can't pay your pensions. We have to cut them by 30%. Defaulting on the debt of, a country is very messy, is extremely messy, also legally. But to print money throughout history, every country has done it. There's no exception, because it's so easy. It creates inflation, that is sure. But this is the idea. Inflation is a tax that people pay, but they don't realize that they're paying this tax. They think the price of groceries or homes or whatever, or insurance premium has gone up because of evil Putin or the mullahs in Iran or evil Xi Jinping in China or whatever. They never considered that themselves made a mistake by overspending and voting for politicians that are basically all liars and will tell the public things that the public wants to hear. They don't want to hear unpleasant news. And I think Trump is an ideal candidate for default, quite frankly.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1 ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Interesting. And speaking of lies and deception, while we're on the subject to Trump, it appears to me that the MAGA base is starting to realize they haven't gotten what they voted for. I think this started with the completely unprovoked bombing of Iran. Now, some people in the comments will say, what do you mean unprovoked? They were about to build a nuclear weapon. Well, that story's been going on. Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about that in the 90s. Iran's about to build a nuclear weapon. So I don't put a ton of credence into that. But nonetheless, this continued. I think the real big blow to the Trump administration has been that not only the total denial that the Epstein list exists, essentially saying Epstein trafficked hundreds or thousands of victims to himself with the help of Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in jail. But now Donald Trump going on a rant on Truth Social and saying, well, the Epstein list does exist, but it was made up by the crooked Democrats, Obama and Hillary and those guys. They're just trying to attack me. So they created the list, which is absolutely ridiculous. How do you see this all ending with this current administration and all the controversy that they're now mired in?
It's a very good question that does not only relate to the current administration, but to the entire political system. My sense is that what will happen, and we don't know in which direction it will go, but eventually we have an authoritarian government again. In other words, it's not going to be called the king, because the king has the connotation to dictatorship and say one man rule. They'll call it something different. But if you look today at the government, it's more a government of the deep state than anything else. And anybody who thinks that Trump is fighting the deep state is mistaken. His state is just a different deep state than the Democrats, but it's basically the same. And I think people one day will be fed up with the whole system that everybody can go and vote, and they will say, well, okay, we have to have a government of, say, I don't know, 10 or 20 intelligent people who run the country. But usually these things do not happen peacefully. As you know, socialism arose out of a philosophy, or I have to rephrase it. It arose out of an ideology created by one man, Karl Marx. Of course, there were other socialists before him who argued for state ownership of land and common ownership and so forth. But basically, it was an ideology that caught on, and it was then brought to the people. And they were fed up with, in Russia, the Tsar, and in Europe with kings and emperors and so forth. And so they introduced more socialist regimes that then necessitated ultra authoritarian governments. Like Stalin was an extreme case of a man who held all the power in his hand, similar to Mao Zedong and so forth. And I think we may move to a world that is maybe very socialistic, where the rich people are being punished, or we may move to a world that is more fascist, where, and this we have in the US, kind of a mending or melting of the government and the corporate sector, where the corporate sector has a lot of influence on the government and the government on the corporate sector, and they kind of work together very closely. I mean, you look at, say, the Treasury secretaries in the US and the Fed chairman, most of them come out of Wall Street and go back to Wall Street. And when you see that, you ask yourself, I mean, how does I know people go and vote, but most wealthy people that I know, or affluent people, they don't go and vote. They're complacent. They know they can beat the system through corruption and through good lawyers and auditors and so forth. I mean, the rich people throughout history have never paid enough taxation, basically. Now, I'm not saying that I encourage a system to have wealthy people like Bezos and Musk and whoever they are. I find this more desirable than that the money flows into the government coffers. Because at least the people like Bezos and Musk, they achieved something. They brought progress to the system, whereas the government doesn't. But the point I want to make, I mean, under Trump, and I've said it already many times, I don't think you could find a man that is more favorable for precious metals than Mr. Trump. He's a gift of God for precious metals holders.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Why is Trump a gift from God for precious metals holders? And also, you wrote recently in your market commentary on silver and platinum, in addition to gold, you said, personally, I believe that the dollar will lose the most against precious metals, but currently more so against silver and platinum than gold. We have seen both metals outperforming gold so far year to date. But first, set the stage for us for why you think Trump is a gift to precious metals holders. And then if you could give some comments on platinum and silver, or why you think they'll outperform.
Well, first of all, if you look at him in his first 6 months of the administration, he's not exactly a man that is trustworthy. You understand? He says today something, then someone walks into his office tonight and he may change his mind. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily terribly bad, because the market can adjust to it and say to itself, let's not pay attention to the clown. Let's look at money supply and look at the economy and so forth. But some of the decisions he's taking are quite important, and they create for the planning departments in corporation a great problem. When you plan your capital spending expenditures for the next 12 months or so, you need to have some kind of an infrastructure, commercial infrastructure, legal infrastructure, in order to plan exactly what would be optimal for your corporation. If you have to set his views and his decisions as of today, you're planning the whole night and you implement a policy for your company about capital spending in the next 12 months, and tomorrow he changes his mind and you have to start all over again. In my view, this will be very negative for the economy. Very negative. So that's why I would have voted for Trump, because there were no alternatives. The alternatives were even worse, or much worse. But it's not a good sign that in a country as important as the US, economically speaking, you have a president who is like Mr. Trump. And now, so regarding the money supply and so forth, Trump would like to cut interest rates, okay? There's a view that some economists have, and cut interest rates. The problem is the bond market, say last September, October, they slashed the Fed fund rate. And what did the bond market do? The Treasury market didn't rally, but it went down. And I am a holder of bonds. I hold the cash portfolio because of my business. And I want to introduce here another thought. You know, people say interest rates have gone up and liquidity has tightened. To this, I say nonsense. If liquidity were tight, Bitcoins wouldn't make a new high, the stock market wouldn't make a new high, the dollar wouldn't be weak, and there would be a bond market rally. In other words, interest rates would go down. Now, what has happened is they increased the cost of money, but not the liquidity. They didn't diminish the liquidity. The liquidity is still there. Take my case. 3 years ago, I didn't get any interest on my cash deposits and so forth. Now, the business is better than ever, because on the cash deposits that I have to maintain because of the nature of my business, I get interest. It's not a lot, 4.5%, but it's a lot compared to zero. So my view is it's possible that the Fed actually should increase interest rates soon. I mean, if I were the Fed chairman and I saw the current constellation of inflationary pressures, dollar weakness, and so forth, and stock markets at a new high, and we have, I mean, if you look at the market activity, we have excessive speculation. Not in the precious metals market, but in all kinds of memes, whatever, and cryptocurrencies and stocks and options that expire the same day, and so forth and so on. So all these are signs that there's plenty of liquidity. There's no tightness, zero tightness. Rich people have huge liquidity, huge. And under these circumstances, you have real estate at, okay, recently it's come down, but it's still in the sky. It's come down 20% or 15% or 10%, but it's still very high. And the affordability is at the record low. We can measure affordability, the typical house price, the median house price, median income, and so this ratio is at an all-time low. So all I want to say is we have plenty of liquidity, and during this monetary inflationary period, it's very difficult for you and me to say something is expensive and something is cheap. But in the case of gold, silver, and platinum, we can go back 100 years and say, well, typically, silver is at this ratio to gold. Say, you need 50 ounces of silver to buy an ounce of gold, or 20, and so forth. And both the ratio of silver to gold and platinum to gold is very high. In other words, platinum and silver are low relative to gold. Wheat, corn, soybeans are also very low relative to gold. But it's natural that gold commands a certain premium because you and I and our viewers and listeners, for them to buy a ton of wheat and to store it is kind of difficult. But to buy a ton of gold, if they have the money, is not a problem.
And so why do you see silver and platinum outperforming gold up ahead? Is it because of this historic level of undervaluation when we're looking at the gold silver or gold platinum ratios?
Yes, I mean, platinum was at the 122 years low 2 months ago vis-a-vis gold. And I've been following the silver and platinum market for a long time. And I would never buy something only because of the technical factors. But I have to say that platinum has broken out on the upside with heavy volume and colossal momentum. I mean, I would not be surprised that in 18 months or within 18 months, the price of platinum is at the same level or higher than gold. In other words, we would go from, at the present time, a touch below 1,400 to over 3,000. That would not surprise me. Also, I think you and I, if we had a lot of money for management like a hedge fund, Bridgewater also, we should be talking to each other and squeeze the market. I don't think it would take a lot of money to squeeze the platinum market. It would take more money to squeeze the silver market or the gold market. But it's been done in the past. And I think Russia and South Africa should squeeze the platinum market.
Yeah, as two of the major producers, the main producers in the world.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've talked on this show before about the coming collapse of the European Union, and things seem to be accelerating in that direction. I think Germany looks like the poster child for these incompetent, destructive policies being pushed out of the EU, including Merz, the chancellor, making threats of forced conscription again, bringing back mandatory conscription to address the so-called threat that Russia presents. We've got the second largest political party, the AfD, being classified as extreme right by intelligence agencies there. I believe another law is being passed in one area of the country that restricts them from getting jobs in politics and holding political offices, things like this. We've seen police raid citizens' homes over social media posts. I mean, the list just goes on and on. What do you make of this shift towards authoritarianism. You mentioned earlier in this interview that you see that potentially coming to America as well. It seems to be in full swing in Germany and the EU. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, as I said, I think democracy will move back into an autocracy. The only problem is, I don't know whether it will be a socialist regime where everybody will be like walking around in blue dresses or green dresses, like in China during the communist regime, or whether it will be like a Latin American banana republic. So far, and I've written this already 10 years ago, how America is moving into a banana republic status. And I think when you look at Trump, he's a typical banana republic leader, authoritarian, and he. I mean, to be fair to him, it is good to have someone who is a bit different and not a typical politician. Biden was a typical politician, highly corrupt and incompetent. Trump is corrupt, but he's less corrupt than some others. And I happen to think that Trump is the perfect man, geopolitically seen, philosophically seen, culturally seen, to bring America into a huge mess. I'm afraid he and Bessent. I would be very suspicious to have a former hedge fund guy running my Treasury department.
That's an interesting point of view because normally people point to that fact and say, well, that's great that he has that experience. And so now he's able to take that experience and all his knowledge and run the Treasury Department. But you're saying that's a bit of a dangerous combination to have someone like that who enters the political realm.
A horrible combination. Horrible.
Break that down for us. Well, why do you think that?
Well, I wouldn't call hedge fund managers to be sort of the most honest people in the world. And they are, the hedge fund basically takes advantage of situations. And I think we live in a world where we should realize that it would be better to compromise instead of creating World War III and antagonizing everybody that is participating in the global economy. But I can say in good conscience, up to now, the US has antagonized enemies and friends alike. I think that is a fair statement. I'm not saying that all the policies that Trump implemented were wrong, but a lot of them were wrong. And I think his ideology of having tariffs is a horrible kind of economic measure because, on the one hand, he was promising lower taxes. Okay, the super rich probably have lower taxes somewhat because the super rich are not touched much by import duties. They can buy, they registered their pleasure boats that cost hundreds of millions of dollars in offshore legislations like Cayman Islands or Bermuda or whatever. And the private planes, same. So they are not subject to import duties. And many of them, they don't have to pay energy taxes when they fly around. And the poor people, they go to the supermarket. Now, Trump imposed a 50% tax on copper. I mean, I think it's just ridiculous. Why would you think that this is a good measure? The US cannot produce sufficient copper themselves. They have to import copper. So why increase the price for it and let ordinary people pay for it? is a horrible measure. It's a regressive tax. A tariff is a tax, period. I've studied, financial policy very thoroughly because I wrote my thesis in economics was about the financial reform of Robert Peel. Robert Peel was a statesman, the Prime Minister of England in 1842, when he repealed the Corn Laws and he repealed the Navigation Acts. These were very protectionist measures that protected English industry. And in the case of the Corn Laws, it protected the landowners in Britain because foreign corn that gradually was produced in America and in Australia was cheaper than in England. So these measures, basically, tariffs is an unfair sales tax, and that the leader, in the case of America now, Trump, he decides this item has a tax of 30% and this item 50% and so forth. These tariffs and protectionism are policies implemented by the worst interventionists, And you and I, all your viewers, we all agree that the free market is the best, is not optimal, is not the best in the whole world or in the universe, but under the conditions that we have in the world today, free markets and capitalistic systems are the best systems that guarantee not absolute freedom, but a high level of freedom.
I want to get back to the EU for just a moment and touch on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because Russia seems to be on the offensive in Ukraine at the moment. Hundreds of drones and missiles are reportedly striking the country every day. Meanwhile, Zelensky keeps begging for more military aid. And after initially saying there would be no more weapons deliveries, you were speaking about Trump flip-flopping on issues. Now he said, okay, we're going to send them more weapons. The EU leadership also fully on board with this, proclaiming the only way to achieve peace is through a military defeat of Russia. Why are they putting so much money and time into this project that seems, at least for the time being, doomed to failure?
In my view, the answer to this question is they're putting a lot of effort to make Russia look like a threat because the domestic economy and the domestic policies are so bad. So you distract the attention of people with a common threat. And you say, we must do this. Like, we have to change, we have to take measures to protect the climate, the environment, and so forth and so on. Otherwise, the world will be flooded or burned or whatever. I think, as an international citizen, I don't think that Putin has done anything terribly wrong. What was done wrong is that the NATO wanted to expand in Ukraine. They didn't have to do it. They could have said, we have Ukraine as a neutral zone, and we respect the sovereignty of Russia, and we understand that they don't want American military bases next door to them. I suppose America wouldn't enjoy very much to have Chinese and Russian bases south of the border and in Canada. I don't know. Maybe they would enjoy it. But the Western world must get used to the fact to look at the world from a global perspective, because it would be a big mistake to think that the Western world still has the economic supremacy and military supremacy they had 50 years ago. This is over. And the other countries that are very powerful, including China and India and Indonesia and Brazil and so forth. So we have to respect the views of these people as well, and we have to respect their perspective. And it seems clear to me that some business interest would like to take advantage of whatever is available in Ukraine and in Russia. If they could, if the US government could, they would grab Russia the way they want to grab Greenland.
I'd like to talk about the BRICS Summit in Rio. BRICS held their 17th annual summit, and 48 hours after the event, Donald Trump threatened additional tariffs on BRICS members for attempting to, quote, degenerate the dollar. I'm going to read something here from an article on Zero Hedge. Quote, the American reaction confirms what many in the global south already perceive, that BRICS is no longer a passive forum for dialogue. It is becoming an active agent in reshaping the architecture of international power. What are your thoughts on the summit and the progress BRICS is making to free themselves of US hegemony?
Well, this movement started a long time ago, and we had prior to that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I think that the world, and don't forget, India is now a larger economy than, say, Britain, which is kind of funny because Britain was the colonial power that controlled India. And according to Indians, caused great damage to the economic development of India. Not necessarily my view, but it's the view of Indians. Anyway, now they are a country with over 1 billion people, and the Western politicians know nothing better to do than to go and lecture India about democracy and so forth. It's a complete joke. Anyway, the world has changed. China used to consume 2% of all commodities in the world in the 1970. Now it's say plus minus 50%. The cement and steel industry in China is larger than the rest of the world combined, and so forth and so on. So what we've had is a huge shift in the balance of economic power that was European and America centric to more the world. The Western world, Europe and America combined, its economy is not as important as the rest of the world. And that leads to huge shifts in economic and political power. And in my view, the Western world doesn't want to accept the fact that this is happening. And to slash tariffs, extra tariffs on BRICS shows how concerned actually the US is about this rising power that we have in the world. And I mean, I have friends, they think we're heading straight into World War III. This is not necessarily my view, but clearly the climate Trump is creating with his trade wars is not very favorable, it's not very conducive. And in my view, they don't know what they're doing. You know, like in Asia, in theory, a great friend of the US would be Vietnam because they feel a bit threatened by China and so forth and their competitor. But what does Trump do? He takes measures to alienate the typical Vietnamese. I mean, I think the prestige of the US has diminished a lot. But as I said, I mean, I want to conclude because I have to go. I think Trump is very favorable for precious metals. And I think an individual who doesn't own any precious metals is making a huge mistake.
Well, Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation. Always appreciate your time. Tell us about the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report.
The report you shouldn't read.
That's an excellent promo.
Yeah. Anyway, I have a website, gloomboomdoom.com, all in one word, gloomboomdoom.com. And I mean, I think, in all modesty, if someone reads my report for 2 years, he would have learned more than 5 years at the business school in America about economics.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the description below to the Gloom Boom and Doom report so people can check it out. Thank you once again, Mark, for coming on the show.
It is my pleasure, Jesse, and good fortune to all your viewers and listeners. Savati krap.
Thank you for joining us today. This episode is brought to you by ARC, Silver, Gold, Osmium. Take advantage of their specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leafs 2025 1-ounce coins, only $2.87 over spot. Well, supplies last. Give Ian Everard, the owner, a call today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.